Hello, everyone. This is JT Keating, Vice President of Product Strategy here at Zimperium. I'd like to welcome you all to a fantastic webinar. We're really excited to get this one off and going. We're very excited because we're doing this in conjunction with our partners and good friends at Microsoft. We're going to be diving into this pretty quickly, just give you a couple upfront perfunctory comments, make some introductions, and then we'll start going. That'll also give folks an opportunity to start rolling in as we see the participants starting to add. So we're going to try and keep this to 30, 40 minutes worth of content. There'll be Q&A at the end. You guys know how to use the Q&A section. If there aren't any questions, we all decided that we're not going to make them up. We don't like doing that, and neither does our friends at Microsoft. So we will give you time back at the end, but obviously, hopefully there will be some questions. Archived version of this will be up on the site within a day or so you can share it with your friends as well. So with that, what I'd like to do is I'd like to introduce you to the folks that I'm going to be doing this webinar with. First, we've got Dave Randall. Dave is the Senior Program Manager of Microsoft Endpoint Manager. So Dave, looking forward to chatting with you.
Thanks so much for the introduction, JT. I'm really excited to be here.
Perfect. And then we also are joined by Asavri Navathe. She's a Program Manager 2, also in the Endpoint Manager world. So Asavri, thanks for joining us as well.
Thanks. Excited to talk to you guys about our joint solutions.
That is perfect. I'm looking forward to it. So folks, we're going to dive in, and obviously everybody knows, and there's no reason to aggrandize the whole COVID thing, but it has fundamentally made a shift that a lot of people are really thinking might be permanent in some cases. And that is a lot more people instantly having to work from home. We've heard a lot of conversations, and both Dave and Asavri's team and our team at Zimperium, people are coming to us constantly saying, hey, what should we do? What should we do? People threw up VPNs immediately before they started realizing, wait a minute, most of our apps are in the cloud. So what are the other options? And so we said, what we're going to do, we're going to put this out there for folks to help at this particular point in time. So, Dave, why don't we start off by kind of dealing with the obvious, right? Why don't you just kind of make some comments about how you see the world having changed?
Sure, I will. Thanks a lot, JT. So, it really is surprising how quickly both IT needs and our own personal worlds have changed as a result of COVID. And if I were to think back a little bit and maybe set some context, and you go back a few years, most of our employees were sitting at a desktop and they had a wired LAN connection. And as a result of that, the company firewall was really defined the security perimeter. And effectively, all of the resources that your employees were using were held on premises. And as companies were improving some flexibility of the workplace, we saw a shift to laptops and tablets as a primary work device. And as a result, oftentimes the user and the device were no longer sitting behind a firewall. SaaS applications and services meant that users were connecting over the internet now to get a lot of their work done. And JT, this year we were at RSA, and we saw a huge shift in what I think of as really the next natural evolution of this process, which falls under the notion of zero trust initiatives. Now, many of you, I think, were on this path in 2019. You knew about zero trust initiatives, and you were working on a plan to implement those. And now, I think you find yourselves in a very accelerated trajectory to embrace a lot of those same zero trust principles that you were interested in and deploy tools that support those, because fundamentally, they're what help your organization allow your users to remain productive in this new work from home environment. So let's dive a little bit on some of the zero trust elements. By default, zero trust means that you don't trust any of your users themselves, the endpoints that they're connecting from, the applications that they're using, and you want to ensure that the data that's in use by any of them is protected in a variety of different ways. And so really each of these four different elements need to gain our trust as IT. And the system, and we'll talk about more of those elements as we continue through this webinar, helps you prescribe rules that establish what's trusted and what happens when any of those elements don't meet those rules. So if you were on the path to supporting these zero trust initiatives, you likely had a pretty solid plan and a timeline in place. But of course, with the arrival of COVID-19, that plan was interrupted with the need to respond to work from home mandates. And respond is probably the first major shift that you had to make, which was a fairly immediate, and as JT said, maybe you stood up a bunch of VPNs and that was your initial response. And many of you are probably still in this respond phase. You're still making adjustments and trying to effectively control and manage the security and productivity of your workers. And we hope that actually this session will help give you some ideas in how you can continue to address the response. But beyond that, actually what you'll need to do is efficiently recover. And the recovery phase can't come at the expense of some of your long-term goals. You can't have significant increases in cost, or you can't expand the risk associated with allowing your users to be productive. And then if you look a little bit further down the road, and I suspect many of you aren't quite here yet, you'll be rebuilding to ensure that the new normal that we'll live under represents your vision of organizational security and productivity. So if we leave all of that as kind of a good foundational statement of where it is that you need to go, what I'll start with is using Microsoft Endpoint Manager as the first recommendation to help secure your remote workers. So let's talk a little bit about that. Microsoft Endpoint Manager helps you focus on outcomes. That's really the goal of the changes that we've made in Endpoint Manager. And a couple of examples of some of those outcomes are the right people on the right devices accessing the right information. They need to be enabled to be productive with whatever device they're using. Is your data protected at all times? And data, now as many of you are using Office 365 and SharePoint Online, that data resides in different locations, physically different locations than it ever had before. When you had it in your own data centers, file servers, you knew exactly where it was, but it resides in many different places and it needs to be protected, whether it's in those cloud locations, whether it's over the wire, or whether it's at rest on those devices as it's being used. Next, we need to ensure that the system is automatically detecting and responding to any threats, whether those are internal threats or external. Certainly, Zimperium has a lot of capabilities for the threat detection, and we'll get into that as we continue on. But that's another key aspect that we need to ensure is part of the real outcome. You want to ensure that you're detecting and responding to threats with the system that you're using. For those applications that your employees are using to access data, are there policies around those applications that protect the data? That's a key outcome that you want to ensure. And then lastly, we need to ensure that our corporate PCs and mobile devices are manageable from a single location. And the real value behind that is that it gives you consistency in security and policy across all the platforms that you're managing. So with Microsoft Endpoint Manager, and as a solution that brings together both Configuration Manager, and I assume many of you are using Configuration Manager today, and Intune, you're really in a good position to be able to answer yes to all of those questions that I brought up. And so that's a really strong position for you to come from. So let's move on to recommendation number 2, which is securing your corporate endpoints. And in order to secure your traditional endpoints here, I'm going to recommend a combination of Microsoft Endpoint Manager and Microsoft Defender ATP. So let's take a look at how those two solutions work together. So first, let's start with what you can be doing today to secure your cloud-connected corporate endpoints. In the Microsoft Endpoint Manager console, we added security baselines. For those of you that might have attended Ignite last year, you saw security baselines were discussed quite a bit then. Many of you will have been using group policy. You probably still are today, and that's perfectly okay. And you've configured a lot of your security settings with group policy. And as I talk to customers, I find that many of you have had any number of people configuring settings in group policy literally over the course of many, many years, 10, 15 years, you've been configuring your group policy settings. And you don't exactly know what all of those are. And it's been a difficult system to manage. But now, for your cloud-enabled corporate PCs, I'd really encourage you to take a look at the security baseline feature. And the reason why is because this encompasses Microsoft's recommendation for securing your Windows desktop systems. You can check it out today if you go to the updated Microsoft Endpoint Manager console, and we just made it a little bit simpler for you to get to. You can just go to endpoint.microsoft.com. And when you get there, you can select Endpoint Security. This is the new node that gives a focus on all of your endpoint security. Open up lines, select Windows 10 baselines, and create a new profile. It's really easy to see all the individual settings for each of these different baselines. And if you want to create a new profile from this baseline, it allows you to easily adjust any one of those individual settings to your own company policy. Defender ATP is also there as a baseline. Edge is also there, and Office baselines will be coming this year. Now, I know that also, in addition to just configuring the security settings for your systems, encrypting your devices is also critical. So Endpoint Manager has support for BitLocker configuration, both through Configuration Manager's integration of MBAM, as well as Intune direct support for cloud-managed PCs for being able to configure BitLocker. Lastly, in the endpoint security section of the MEM console, you can configure and deploy settings for Defender ATP, antivirus, firewall, endpoint detection and response, and attack surface reduction. So from one location, that endpoint.management or endpoint.microsoft.com, you've got a consistent view of your security configuration, as well as a single place to deploy the settings to both your cloud-connected and your on-premises PCs that are connected through Configuration Manager. Which brings us to the next group of devices, which is your mobile fleet. So JT, if you would, I'd like you to walk us through our next recommendation.
Perfect. Thanks, Dave. Yeah, as you folks can see, what we're doing is we're kind of taking this in a stair-step fashion. I mean, first, in order to do anything, you need to be able to manage, right? You need to have some visibility and management capabilities. Then you need to start securing, right? And so Dave was just talking about securing traditional endpoints, but then, as he just pointed out, now we've got the mobile side of things. And when Dave was talking about the traditional corporate-based endpoints, now this specific part is on corporate mobile. Then we'll roll forward into the BYOD scenario, which is becoming more and more prevalent from a remote access standpoint. So the recommendation number 3 is to secure the mobile endpoints with Zimperium zips. And we had been talking about this, that there is a customer need as people, as Dave mentioned earlier, are proactively moving from PCs to mobile. They're used to protecting their PCs against all these vulnerabilities. Until recently, mobile wasn't being accounted for to the same extent, right? There are some built-in capabilities. Obviously, there's things like device-level encryption, PIN codes, all the rest of that kind of fun stuff. But there really wasn't something for proactive detection of threats. And when you predominantly look at the job of security professionals, it's to protect the enterprise against risks. We need to protect ourselves against the risk on these mobile devices because they're accessing the same data and services quite often as traditional endpoints. So Zimperium has one core detection engine. It's called Z9. Z9 is the ability to do on-device detection of the 4 major attack vectors, which are device compromises, network attacks like rogue access points and man-in-the-middle, phishing. Mobile phishing is huge. 90% of breaches start with a phishing attack. 2/3 of emails are read on mobile, and that doesn't even account for personal emails, messenger, texting, all these other vectors that are brand new on mobile. And then, of course, malicious apps. So for protecting mobile endpoints, our product is called Zips. And Zips has the ability to go from risk identification through threat detection, remediation, and reporting. And risk in our world, similar to what we were just talking about with vulnerabilities, risks are things that you've done to inherently make yourself more likely to either be attacked or to have an attack succeed, right? So examples of that can be obviously vulnerabilities. You know, a little known piece of trivia that you're probably very familiar with now, but might not have been a while ago, is the fact that users are the admins of these devices. There is no patch management system. You've got to rely on them to be able to do it. And so notoriously, mobile devices are way behind. App risks, the apps that are actually on the device themselves, they can have inherent security and privacy risks inside of them. Risky networks are things like, you know, unencrypted networks, unsecure Wi-Fi, things on those lines. Threats are when you're actually being attacked. And so on these, I mentioned the big 4, those are the various different things that need to be detected. And once they're detected, then you need to be able to remediate. And especially in working with an MDM, in this particular case with Intune or Endpoint Manager, they have significantly more rights and capabilities. And on each one of these mobile devices, you can only have one Uber app, and that's usually an MDM. So there are some simple local remediations we can do, depending on what's happening. We have some pretty advanced ones with Samsung on device, one of our investors. But as a general rule, we work tightly with an MDM. And then, of course, there's reporting. And the reporting is putting all the information into SIMs and EDR. So for instance, Zimperium is the only MTD provider, mobile threat defense provider, that is integrated into Defender ATP and into Sentinel, in addition to all the traditional SIMs. So a rough workflow on this is if Zips detects something, like I said, we could do some local action, usually network-based, et cetera. But most of the time, our information from Zips goes to our Z console, which is integrated directly into Endpoint Manager. And then based on the risk level that we set the device on, conditional access is occurred. So it'll say, here's exactly what we're going to do with that. And we're going to talk about a similar flow in a few minutes, but that's protecting corporate. These are managed devices. How do we actually go about securing those? But now I'm going to ask Asavri if she can actually talk to us about what are we doing first in terms of managing BYOD? What's an approach?
Thanks, JT. All right, so in terms of enabling BYO use cases with Microsoft Endpoint Manager, essentially what it comes down to is app protection policies. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so let's chat about app protection policies and how they enable the BYO use case. So there are some unique challenges to the BYO scenario, as I'm sure your organizations have discussed and had to face. So some of them are, this is an end user's personal device. They don't want their admin to have access to the device to the extent that, you know, the admin can make calls on removing any personal data or impact the usability of the phone that they paid money for. There's also a general need for lighter weight management in BYO world. Nobody is going to be creating super extensive Excel spreadsheets or coding apps on their BYO phone, maybe on a tablet a little bit more so, but the main scenarios are viewing, updating corporate data, connecting to similar endpoints, and accessing email. And then another challenge is any IT or security features that require some permissions or access to parts of the end user device, it might be limited based on what the OS allows on the device where the EMM solution or the Enterprise Mobility Management solution does not have full permissions to the device. So given these challenges, even though these exist with users being remote and using their personal devices these days, not all organizations have the luxury of providing all end users with an MDM managed device, especially given how rapidly things changed in the past couple of months. So how can we protect the device? With Intune App Protection Policies. So Intune App Protection Policies are built into all the core Microsoft Office apps, as well as top third-party apps used in enterprise, and an organization can also integrate them into their own line of business apps that are used for productivity or connecting to corporate endpoints. These policies are available to be configured on iOS or Android, and IT admins can configure these settings in the areas of data protection, access requirements, and conditional launch. Data protection settings govern behaviors like data transfer between managed and unmanaged contexts. Access requirements specify PIN or corp credential requirements to get into a corporate context of the app, and conditional launch is a set of conditions that a device or app must meet in order to allow the end user to get into their corporate data. So Intune App Protection Policies can be used with or without device enrollment into an MDM provider. And one key scenario is that they enable this protection of corporate data for organizations with BYOD programs without enrollment. So conceptually, the zero trust model eliminates the need of trust based on network location within a perimeter. Instead, it leverages device and user trust claims to gate access to data and resources. It's an idea that can be implemented in many different ways. So through conditional access, what some of you might be familiar with, and through Intune App Protection as well, where we have the user sign in with their AAD account, check into the MAM service, make sure the app and device meets the admin requirements before continued access to a protected app. This solution works longer term as well, when your organization can't necessarily get back to normal so fast after employees start getting back to work. All right, so the last tip that we have is securing your BYO endpoints with Zimperium and the Endpoint Manager app protection solution. So let's get into that. All right, so consider trusted endpoints, which are trusted only when identity is established, compliance is demonstrated, risk is measured, and deemed as acceptable. So with this idea of zero trust, we aim to prevent network access and lateral movement using stolen credentials or compromised device. So when an end user is enabled for Zimperium threat scanning with Intune, when the end user signs into a protected app protected by Intune App Protection Policies, the Zips app on the device will scan the device based on threats that the security department, the IT department has deemed concerning to their organization. Zimperium tells the Intune services that this end user's device is at a specific threat level. If that threat level does not meet the criteria that the IT department has deemed acceptable, Intune now sends down a block request via our conditional launch capabilities, and the user can't access this protected application. Once the device threat is remediated, the access is granted for that user on the device, and it's back to business. So the MTD solution here with Zimperium is available on unenrolled devices, which means BYOD users can now be blocked from accessing corporate content on their Android and iOS devices, including all of these apps, the protected apps that I mentioned before. It's a unique offering from the other endpoint management solutions because of this integration with the Office apps experience, and you no longer need to require device enrollment to take advantage of mobile threat defense. And this is enabled not through conditional access, but actually through Intune App Protection. When I say Intune, I just refer to the cloud offerings of Microsoft Endpoint Manager, if you've been hearing that word as well. So I'll pass it over now to JT for to go more into the flow of what the Microsoft and Zimperium integration looks like for unenrolled devices, and the summary as well.
Thank you, Sabri. That was great. That was excellent. And thank you, Dave, as well. And Sabri, kind of, ran you guys through this just a little bit at a high level, but then we thought it would be, kind of helpful to kind of go back to the visual. And you'll notice in some ways it's very similar to the visual of threat detection and response or remediation through a combination of Zimperium Zips and Endpoint Manager. But as Asavri was just saying, it gets back to a conditional launch versus a conditional access. So as she mentioned, first thing, it's already synchronized. We obviously have, dozens and dozens and dozens of customers that have already been tied in between zConsole and Intune/Endpoint Manager. When the user goes the first time, if a company has selected Zimperium as the MTD for BYOD tied in with the Endpoint Manager option, the thing I think is great is, you think about it just logically, what are the first apps that you're going to give somebody from a BYOD standpoint? And email and productivity apps are the first ones. And that is where they already have built in the MAM SDK that Asavri was just discussing. So in this case, when somebody comes in, they say, okay, if we've selected Zimperium, it'll tell the user that they can't get access. So they're coming to get out, into Outlook. They can't get it until they download, basically, from the consumer's thought process, antivirus, right? They're like, oh, okay, I have to have antivirus. So they download it, they go through the process, and then let's say that a threat is detected, as Asavri was just talking about. That information goes up to zConsole, like usual, our management console. That goes over to Endpoint Manager with a risk level of high, if that is, as Asavri was talking about, based on all the device, network, phishing, app attacks, what status do you want us to give to the device? And if we say that the device threat level is at high, then there's conditional launch. So in this case, the user will not be able to get to their email until they fix the problem. So they would actually go back over to the Zimperium, fix the problem. Let's say it's remove malware. Maybe they went to a third-party app store, or they're on a malicious network, and so they have to get off of it. Once they do, then, as Asavri mentioned, they get access back to it. So we are right exactly where we said we would be, close to the 30 minutes. The wrap up of the top 5 ways to secure remote workers. First, got to manage things. Manage the corporate endpoints with Microsoft Endpoint Manager, MDM. Then you have to secure traditional endpoints with Endpoint Manager and Defender ATP. Secure corporate mobile endpoints with Zimperium Zips. Enable BYOD with Microsoft Endpoint MAM. And then secure the devices, those BYOD devices, with a combination of Zips and Endpoint Manager MAM doing the conditional launch capability that we just talked about. So with that, we're going to stop and see if anybody has questions. And as I pull up the questions, and I will start fielding them, Dave or Asavri, do you have any other things you'd like to add at this point in time? Anything you thought might have been missed?
No, I think at least as we went through it, I feel like we've got a good coverage across combination of all of your traditional desktop endpoints as well as mobile and BYO. So hopefully folks have a good idea of what it is that they can go back to the office and start working on.
That is perfect. That is perfect. Okay, so we do have a few questions.
Yep.
First one, and I assume this would probably be for you guys, Dave, is will there be any certifications given for attendees of this session? I think maybe people are talking about training credits, I would assume.
Yeah, we don't have anything planned from the Microsoft side from a certifications perspective.
Perfect. Okay. And then there's a question which I think Dave, you and I were both kind of expecting.
Yep.
So we can both take a shot at it. And that is, how does Zimperium fit with the recent announcements that Android and iOS will be supported by Windows Defender ATP? So yeah, and Dave, do you want to take first shot, or would you like me to?
Sure. That announcement does cover Android and iOS and Mac as part of Defender ATP. But the one thing that I really like about Zimperium and the capabilities is there are differentiated services that Zimperium offer, and so even though you have a choice about what it is that you want to be able to leverage for using a either ATP or Zimperium, there's capabilities and features and offerings that Zimperium brings that aren't part of the Defender ATP. So I would encourage you to take a look at both of those and do an evaluation of them and see which of those fulfill both your security requirements as well as your remediation requirements and reporting, because there are differences between them. And Zimperium's been around for quite a while and has a rich feature set. So I'd encourage you to take a look at both and evaluate those as your organization security needs dictate.
Yeah, and I would agree with that as well. And obviously we have a very close working relationship with the Microsoft folks, but there's a huge difference. And if you go through the standard evolution of technology product solution, for instance, we've been doing this for a long time, and we have a lot of capabilities that can benefit and fit into this world. And frankly, if you look at the 4 attack vectors, the current solution that has been announced is really focused on malware and a little bit of phishing. And there's a whole other category of network attacks, device compromises, et cetera. So it depends on what it is you're looking for in the solution. I had another question, which was, can I please address what Zimperium sees outside of the controlled apps from a privacy perspective? I think what the question is asking, in terms of our detection capabilities, what do we see in terms of visibility? And Zimperium is actually considered the most privacy protecting MTD provider out there. I mentioned that we are the guys that do our detection on device. One of the main reasons that we do our detection on device, or a huge benefit of doing detection on device, is if the bad guy owns the network, we can still run instead of having to go to a cloud, which is the first thing that the bad guy will turn off. Another huge advantage is we can operate on any cloud. So for instance, we operate on Azure with no problems whatsoever. And another is privacy. Depending on what you want to do, we can have 0 data leave the device. An example of that is City of New York. If you go into the App Store and you see the NYC Secure app, that is Zimperium zips with 0 data ever leaving the device. And it's actually been vetted by all the privacy groups. So when GDPR happened, CCPA happened, didn't mean anything to us, because we'd have one setting that's GDPR and it's 0 PII. So very friendly from that standpoint. Let's see. Zimperium is, Dave, this will be an interesting one. Zimperium is integrated into some other MDM solutions, example, Mobile Iron. Are Zimperium and Microsoft working on a solution to implement zips into the company app? Company app, I think they mean?
Yeah, probably company portal.
Okay.
No, we don't have anything to say about that at this time.
Okay, perfect. And then who can make compliance conditional access? I'm not sure I understand the question, so we'll have to deal with that one afterwards. Let's see. In a BYO scenario, what kind of data is collected from the device to determine threat level? My question comes from a user privacy perspective. Yeah, so back again to what we were talking about just a second ago. Because we're not taking a bunch of data and throwing it up into the cloud, what we're doing is we're actually looking at changes in the system and things on those lines that is freely available to any app, but does not involve any PII at all. So from a user privacy standpoint, it is completely protected. So it looks like we are out of time at this point. I would just like to once again thank Dave and Asavri. It's been a lot of fun. I really appreciate you guys stepping us through this. And again, the archive version will be up on the site before too long. And if you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out to either or any or either of us. Sorry, I'm stumbling over my words there. And just thank you again, everybody, and have a great day.
Thanks so much for hosting, JT.
Thanks a lot.